The first time I saw Ethan's mudroom, I was overwhelmed by the sheer number of boots. They were everywhere, lined up against the wall, piled in corners, some caked with fresh mud, others worn and weathered by years of farm work. There were tall rubber boots for the rainy season, insulated work boots for winter, casual boots for everyday wear, and even a few pairs that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. It was chaos, but somehow organized chaos, telling the story of a man deeply connected to the land he worked. I remember standing there, city shoes looking painfully out of place, when Ethan walked in behind me. "Sorry about the mess," he said with that crooked smile that would eventually become my favorite sight in the world. The mudroom's kind of where life happens around here. I couldn't have known then how prophetic those words would be, how that simple space between the outside world and his home would become the backdrop for our love story. "My name is Liam, and I'm an artist from the city." I'd come to Ethan's farm for the weekend, desperately seeking inspiration after months of creative block. A mutual friend had connected us, mentioning that Ethan occasionally rented out a room to visitors looking for a countryside retreat. What was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway to clear my head and hopefully spark my creativity turned into something neither of us could have anticipated. Ethan was everything I wasn't: practical, grounded, with hands that told stories of hard work and a connection to the earth. His dark hair was usually tucked under a worn baseball cap, and his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, which was often. He had this way of moving through the world with purpose and certainty that I envied, so different from my own tendency to get lost in thoughts and possibilities. That first evening, after showing me to the guest room with its handmade quilt and view of the rolling fields, Ethan invited me to join him for dinner. "Nothing fancy," he warned, "but it's all from right here on the farm." The meal was simple but incredible: roasted vegetables he'd grown himself, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and a bottle of wine from a neighboring vineyard. As we ate, the conversation flowed easily between us, surprising me with its depth and comfort. "So what kind of art do you make?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious in a way that didn't feel like the polite small talk I was used to from strangers. I explained my work: abstract paintings that explored the relationship between urban environments and human emotion, expecting his eyes to glaze over, as most people's did. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions and listened intently to my answers. "I'd love to see your work sometime," he said, and I believed him. The next morning, I woke to the sounds of a working farm, distant machinery, animals stirring, and Ethan's boots on the porch. When I made my way downstairs, he was in the kitchen, cooking breakfast and humming along to the radio. "Morning, city boy," he called out with a grin. "Sleep okay? Thought I'd show you around the place today, if you're interested." I was interested, more than I probably should have been, given that this was supposed to be a weekend focused on my art. But there was something about Ethan that drew me in: his easy confidence, his passion when he talked about his farm, the way his eyes seemed to see right through my carefully constructed urban persona. The tour of the farm was like stepping into another world. Ethan showed me the fields where he grew organic vegetables, the small orchard of apple trees just beginning to blossom, the barn where he kept a few horses and a small herd of goats. Everything had a purpose, a rhythm, a connection to the seasons and the land. It was so different from my life in the city, where I often felt disconnected from anything real or lasting. "Want to help feed the chickens?" Ethan asked, handing me a bucket of feed without waiting for an answer. His hand brushed mine in the exchange, and I felt a jolt of something I hadn't expected: attraction, yes, but also a sense of possibility that had been missing from my life for too long. The chickens were ridiculous, clucking and scrambling around our feet as we scattered the feed. I couldn't help laughing, and Ethan joined in, his deep chuckle mixing with my higher one in perfect harmony. "They're not exactly dignified," he admitted, "but they've got personality. Like someone else I'm getting to know," I teased, surprising myself with the flirtation. Ethan's eyebrows shot up, but his smile widened. "Careful, city boy," he warned playfully. "You might find yourself getting attached to this place." The day continued in that vein, working together to harvest vegetables for dinner, Ethan teaching me to drive the small tractor, which I nearly crashed into a fence, sitting on the porch in the afternoon sun drinking homemade lemonade. It was simple, unhurried, and more fulfilling than anything I'd experienced in months. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades I itched to capture on canvas, Ethan suggested we head back to the house to clean up before dinner. We were both covered in dirt from the day's activities, my city clothes now bearing the marks of farm work that I found myself strangely proud of. When we reached the mudroom, Ethan stopped me before I could enter the house. "Farm rule number 1, he said seriously. No bringing the fields inside. Boots and dirty clothes stay in the mudroom." I looked down at my mud-caked shoes and jeans, then back at Ethan with a helpless shrug. I didn't exactly pack for farm work. "These are all I've got with me." Ethan considered this for a moment. Then his face lit up with a solution. "I've got some clothes that might fit you. But first, those shoes have got to go." He gestured to the washing machine in the corner of the mudroom. "Sit there while I grab you something to change into." I hesitated, looking at the high-sided washing machine. "I'm not sure I can." Before I could finish, Ethan had stepped forward, his hands finding my waist. "Allow me," he said, his voice dropping lower. With a strength that shouldn't have surprised me but did, he lifted me effortlessly and set me on the edge of the washing machine lid. Our faces were suddenly level, his hands still at my waist, and time seemed to stop in that small, boot-filled room. "There," he said softly, his smile gentle and something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" I couldn't speak, caught in the moment and the closeness of him. He smelled like earth and sunshine, and something uniquely Ethan. His hands were warm through the thin fabric of my shirt, and I found myself leaning slightly into his touch. "I'll get you those clothes," he said after a moment that stretched between us like honey, slow and sweet. But he didn't move immediately, his eyes holding mine in a question neither of us was ready to ask out loud. When he finally stepped away, I felt the loss of his warmth acutely. He disappeared into the house, leaving me perched on the washing machine, surrounded by his boots and the evidence of his life, wondering how in less than 24 hours this place and this man had begun to feel more like home than my apartment in the city ever had. Ethan returned with a stack of clothes, worn jeans, a flannel shirt, thick socks. "Bathroom's through there," he said, nodding toward a door off the mudroom. "You can change, and then we'll figure out dinner." The clothes smelled like him, I noticed as I changed. They were too big, of course, the jeans requiring a tight roll at the ankles and the shirt hanging loose on my slimmer frame. But there was something comforting about being wrapped in his clothes, like carrying a piece of him with me. When I emerged, Ethan was waiting, having changed into clean clothes himself. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of me in his clothes, a pleased expression crossing his face before he masked it with a teasing grin. "Well, you make a convincing farmer now, at least from a distance." Dinner that night was even more relaxed than the previous evening, the day's shared experiences creating a foundation for deeper conversation. Ethan told me about growing up on the farm, inheriting it from his parents who had retired to Florida, his decision to convert to organic methods despite the challenges. I shared stories of my journey as an artist, the struggle to make a living doing what I loved, the recent creative drought that had left me questioning everything. "Maybe you're just painting the wrong things," Ethan suggested thoughtfully, refilling our wine glasses. "You talk about urban environments and human emotion, but when was the last time you painted something that really moved you? Something that wasn't about concepts or ideas, but just about feeling?" His question hit me harder than I expected, piercing through the intellectual framework I'd built around my art. When was the last time I'd painted from pure emotion? I couldn't remember. "There's a spot on the eastern edge of the property," Ethan continued. "Sunrise, there is something else. Might be worth bringing your sketchbook tomorrow, if you're interested." I nodded, unable to articulate how much his suggestion meant. Not just the location, but his understanding of what I might need. "I'd like that," I said simply. We stayed up late that night, talking by the fireplace as the temperature dropped outside. Ethan told me about his failed relationship with a man from a neighboring town who couldn't handle the demands of farm life. I shared stories of my own romantic disappointments, men who loved the idea of dating an artist more than they loved me. The wine and the firelight made it easy to be honest, to let down the guards we both usually kept raised. "It's not easy," Ethan said, staring into the flames. "Finding someone who gets it, who understands that this isn't just a job or a place, it's who I am." "I think that's true for most of us," I replied. "Finding someone who sees all of you and stays anyway." His eyes met mine across the dimly lit room. "Yeah," he said softly. "That's exactly it." When we finally said goodnight, there was a moment at the top of the stairs where we both hesitated, the air between us charged with possibility. But Ethan simply squeezed my shoulder and wished me sweet dreams, disappearing into his bedroom before I could decide if I was disappointed or relieved. True to his word, Ethan woke me before dawn the next morning, a gentle knock on my door and a murmured, "Sunrise waits for no man, city boy." I dressed quickly in his borrowed clothes and grabbed my sketchbook, following him through the silent house and out into the cool pre-dawn air. The eastern field was a short walk, and we made it in comfortable silence, the world around us still dark but beginning to stir. Ethan had brought a thermos of coffee and 2 mugs, which he set on a flat rock before spreading out a blanket for us to sit on. "Best seat in the house," he said, gesturing for me to join him on the blanket. "Just wait." And he was right. As the first hints of light began to touch the horizon, the landscape transformed before our eyes. Colors emerged from darkness, soft purples and pinks bleeding into the deep blue of the night sky, golden light illuminating the edges of clouds, the silhouettes of trees gradually taking shape against the brightening backdrop. It was breathtaking in its simplicity and perfection. Without thinking, I opened my sketchbook and began to draw, not the sunrise itself, but the feeling it evoked, the peace, the promise, the sense of being exactly where I was meant to be. Beside me, Ethan sipped his coffee in silence, giving me space to work while his presence anchored me to the moment. When I finally looked up, the sun was fully risen, and Ethan was watching me with an expression that made my heart skip. "You get lost in it," he observed. "When you're creating, it's beautiful to watch." No one had ever said that to me before, and I felt exposed in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Thank you," I said, meaning it for more than just the compliment. "For bringing me here. For showing me this." "Anytime," he replied, and I could hear in his voice that he meant it. The rest of the day passed too quickly. We worked together in the vegetable garden, Ethan teaching me how to tell when tomatoes were ready to pick and laughing at my city-dweller ignorance about the most basic aspects of food production. We took the horses for a ride around the property, my inexperience obvious, but Ethan patient and encouraging. We prepared lunch together in his kitchen, moving around each other with an ease that felt like we'd been doing it for years instead of days. And through it all, there was a current of awareness between us, a growing tension that was sweet rather than uncomfortable. Our hands would brush as we passed tools in the garden. Our eyes would meet over simple moments and hold a beat too long. Our conversations would dip into deeper waters before resurfacing with shared laughter. By late afternoon, I was dreading the next day's departure. My weekend retreat was nearly over, and the thought of returning to my city apartment, to deadlines and noise and loneliness, felt increasingly wrong. But I had commitments, a gallery showing in 2 weeks that I wasn't ready for, bills to pay, a life I'd built that I couldn't simply walk away from. We were back in the mudroom, removing our boots after checking on a fence in the far pasture, when the weight of my impending departure hit me fully. I must have sighed or shown some sign of my thoughts, because Ethan looked up from unlacing his boots. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I shook my head, not wanting to break the spell of the weekend with reality. "Nothing. Just thinking about tomorrow." Understanding dawned in his eyes. Back to the real world, huh?" "Something like that," I admitted. "Though I'm starting to wonder which world is more real, that one or this one." Ethan straightened, abandoning his boots to step closer to me. "They're both real," he said. "Just different." I nodded, unable to articulate the confusion I was feeling. Ethan studied my face for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. Without warning, he once again placed his hands on my waist and lifted me onto the washing machine lid, just as he had the day before. "What are you doing?" I asked, laughing despite my mood. He didn't answer immediately, instead stepping between my knees and bringing his hands up to frame my face. "Something I've been wanting to do since you walked into my mudroom looking completely out of place and absolutely perfect," he said quietly. And then he kissed me. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. But when I responded, wrapping my arms around his neck and pulling him closer, the kiss deepened into something hungry and honest. His hands slid from my face to my back, holding me against him as if he was afraid I might disappear. My fingers found their way into his hair, knocking his ever-present cap to the floor, unnoticed by either of us. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Ethan rested his forehead against mine. I know you have to go back tomorrow, he said, his voice rough. I know you have a life there. But I needed you to know how I feel before you left. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the emotions coursing through me. Ethan, You don't have to say anything, he interrupted. I'm not asking for promises. I just couldn't let you leave without knowing. But I did have things to say, feelings I needed to express even if I couldn't see where they might lead. These past 2 days have been more real than anything I've experienced in years, I told him, pulling back slightly so I could see his face. You've shown me parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. And I don't know what that means for tomorrow or next week or next month, but I know I don't want this to be the end. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the fields, gradual, then brilliant. Then it won't be, he said simply, as if it could really be that easy. That night, I stayed in Ethan's room, our bodies learning each other in the darkness, conversations whispered against skin, promises neither of us was sure we could keep but desperately wanted to. And in the morning, when it was time for me to leave, Ethan walked me to my car with our fingers intertwined. This isn't goodbye, he said firmly. It's just until next time. I wanted to believe him. I did believe him. But as I drove away, watching his figure grow smaller in my rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the fear that reality would intrude on the magic we'd found. That distance and different lives would prove too much to overcome. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation for my gallery showing, but Ethan was a constant presence through texts and late-night phone calls. He sent me pictures of the farm, of new vegetable sprouts and baby goats and sunrises I was missing. I sent him sketches inspired by our weekend together, evidence that my creative drought had broken in spectacular fashion. The night of the gallery opening, I was a nervous wreck. My new work was a departure from my previous style, more emotional, more raw, more honest. Landscapes infused with feeling, abstract pieces that somehow captured the essence of connection and belonging. I'd titled the collection Mudroom, a private joke and a public declaration all at once. I was explaining one of the larger pieces to a potential buyer when I felt a presence behind me. Before I could turn, a familiar voice said, "The artist really captures the feeling of that place, doesn't he?" Ethan stood there in clothes I'd never seen him wear. Dark jeans without a speck of mud, a button-down shirt that highlighted the breadth of his shoulders, boots that were clearly for style rather than function. He looked both completely out of place in the gallery and absolutely perfect. "What are you doing here?" I asked when I could speak, aware of the potential buyer discreetly moving away to give us privacy. "Supporting the artist I believe in," Ethan replied with a grin. "And maybe making sure he knows I meant what I said about it not being goodbye." Later that night, after the successful opening had wound down and we were alone in my apartment, Ethan told me he'd been thinking. The farm has a studio space, the old sunroom my mother used for her plants. It gets amazing light all day. It would need some work, but... "Are you asking me to move to your farm?" I interrupted, both terrified and thrilled by the possibility. Ethan took my hands in his. "I'm asking you to consider it. Not right away. We've still got a lot to learn about each other. But maybe more weekends, longer visits. See if you can work there, if we can build something real together." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were logistics to consider, compromises to make, realities to face. But standing there in my city apartment with Ethan's hands warm around mine, I could see the path forward more clearly than I'd seen anything in years. 6 months later, I officially gave up my apartment and moved to the farm. The sunroom became my studio, filled with light and the view of fields that never failed to inspire me. My work found a new audience, people who connected with the authenticity I discovered in myself and my art. And every evening, Ethan and I would meet in the mudroom, removing our boots side by side, his caked with the evidence of farm work, mine spattered with paint, before stepping together into the home we were building. Sometimes, when we're feeling playful or nostalgic, Ethan will lift me onto that washing machine lid and smile, reminding us both of the moment everything changed. And in that mudroom filled with boots, his, mine, and sometimes those of friends and family who visit, I found the belonging I spent years searching for in the city. It turns out home isn't a place at all. It's a person who sees all of you and stays anyway. It's the courage to remove your protective layers and step, vulnerable but honest, into love. And sometimes, it's a mudroom filled with boots, the space between two worlds where the most important journeys begin. Total _char_count, 18,246.